We're students from summer school and we made the documentary about video games.
We all like video games, now we want to know how they were made.
We also like to find out which games that friends like and why. My favorite video game is Assassin's Creed 2 because there's a lot of killing and you could go in places and it takes place in medieval times.
God of War 3.
Why do you like it?
It's sick.
Guitar Hero. What I like about Guitar Hero, obviously, is that, you just play Guitar Hero, you're pressing the threat buttons, you're strumming, and, you're playing along with the song.
That's the thought of four. Because you get to kill people in there and you get to shoot and walk around and you can go to the store.
My favorite video game is James Bond. I like it because there's a lot of shooting in it. It makes me lose all my stress and stuff. It's my favorite video game because my dad used to play it a lot and we used to play it together.
My favorite game is Cars because I know lots of things about cars.
Star Wars. Why? Because find it a lot of fun playing.
Legend of Fox New York, you know why? Because it's a good game, it takes a lot of stress off of me. Instead of going punching someone on the street, I can do it, play the game.
I like Blackest because you can shoot people and I like to go on missions and do stuff.
Your life force is running out.
How much time do you spend playing video games a day?
I go 15-20 minutes.
Hours, 1 hour.
Usually I'll play for 3 hours.
Sometimes 2 hours, but I put in 10 minutes.
Don't know, probably a long time.
For half a day.
I played till 5 o'clock.
I spend 2 hours playing my games every day.
I'll take 1 or 2 hours to play with the Guitar Hero.
I play, when I get home it's 5 o'clock. I play from 5 till 12 or 1 in the morning. And yeah.
Why do you like video games?
I find it fun playing.
You could do all sorts of stuff and you could practice at them. And you could get better and you could beat your friends in that.
When I'm bored, I play them.
Because they're fun to play with.
I like video games because there's nothing else better to do.
Because they're kind of actually cool because every year when I make a new system for the games, they have new graphics and other kinds of stuff that are really, really cool.
Because it's fun, I don't have to be bored.
Because it's fun to play games and I like to play.
Well, I like video games because obviously it's all about having fun. But as long as you're playing games that don't put you in a spot where you just want to take it out on the streets to people and start violence right away. But you shouldn't be doing that.
Hi, we're interviewing you how you make video games. Can you please tell us your name and what do you do here at Ubisoft?
My name is Philippe Tarien. I'm a game designer and I've been designing games at Ubisoft for about 10 years now.
Why do you decide to become a game designer?
I always looked for a job where I could do something that would have an impact on people, and I took classes in cinema in CJAP, and that was interesting, but I wanted something that was a bit more interactive with people, so I went into video games, And I really got convinced that that's what I wanted to do when I saw people buy my game at Christmas and really be enjoying what I was doing. And that's why I do it, because I know that some people are very happy to get the games that I make, and that's very motivational for me.
Where did you learn to do your job?
When I started to work in the industry, there was no classes in school. So basically, it was a bunch of people, and we would decide what our jobs would be. So I was lucky because I started at a time when there was room for everybody to grow into the position. Now there's classes in school, but ultimately I just made a lot of mistakes. I made bad games for a while. I made lots of errors that I could have avoided. But since I was kind of along, the first groups of people that were doing it, it was a little bit more difficult. Now it's better, but I guess I had to teach myself in a way. I wouldn't recommend it today, though.
Do you like your job and why?
I think I have the best job in the world. My job is always different. I get to do different things every day. If I work on a game with race cars, I get to go drive a race car. I get to travel. I get to meet all sorts of interesting people. It's a very, very interesting job because it's always changing, and I don't have to sit at my desk all day all the time, and that counts for a lot for me.
Where do the ideas for video games come from?
When we make a new game, we basically group up everybody that's going to be involved in the first days of the project. That's usually about a dozen people. There's a few programmers, a few artists, a few designers, and whoever is producing the project. And we talk about it. We just get into a room and we say, what could we come up with that would be interesting, that would be new. And that takes many, many months. It can take about 6 months to maybe sometimes even a year to come up with the idea. And the more we go, the more we filter down, right? So every time everybody agrees on something, we keep the idea. Every time everybody disagrees, we remove the idea. So if we're making an adventure game, then we say, this is all the things that we could do. This is what everybody else has done. And we filter that down until it becomes what the game is supposed to be. So that takes a lot of negotiation, a lot of arguing. It's basically like arguing with a younger brother or sister about, what TV channel to watch, except professionally, It takes a while, but it's a really interesting process. It's fun.
What are the steps to making a video game?
Well, at first, when you make a game, you have to come up with the idea, right? You have to make sure that you're coming up with ideas that are going to be interesting to the people that are going to play the game. So we identify who's going to be our target audience, that we call. In other words, is it a game for younger people? Is it a game for adults? We come up with what that is. And then once we have those ideas, we come up with the plan of what it's going to cost, what it's going to take. So we'll say it's going to take us 50 programmers to make this game, and it's going to take 3 years. So when we have that planning, then we start to recruit people. And for the X amount of years that it's going to take to make that project, we make sure that what our idea was at the beginning is maintained throughout production. We call that maintaining the vision. And it's part of our job to walk the floor every day and make sure that what everybody else is making is going to work. If you want to have an easier idea of how that works, imagine that we're building this giant Lego construction, and let's say that it's a giant, right? Well, you could be making a leg and somebody else would be making an arm, but it's my job to make sure that when all the pieces come together, it fits and it looks like the giant creature that we thought of, in the first days. So that's how it works. It's basically a long process. It takes about 2 to 5 years to make a game nowadays.
What is the best game you ever worked on?
That's a good question. The best game I ever worked on, I think the most fun I've had was working on a game called Naruto Rise of a Ninja, because I got to go to Japan. I got to meet a lot of really interesting Japanese people that work on the comic book that they make over there. So that was probably the most interesting. I got to discover a new culture that I wasn't familiar with either. I didn't know how people lived in Japan. I didn't know what kind of food they ate. So it's kind of funny when you make games to talk about that, right? But because of the traveling, you get to meet new people. So that was the most interesting, because when I made the game, I had to make sure that all the jokes, all the humor that was in the game was relevant to the Japanese people as well as people here, because they don't have the same jokes, stuff that we're familiar with, they don't necessarily relate to the same way. So I had to learn what to do and how to dose that. It was very interesting, very new.
How many people work on each game?
It depends on the games, how many people are involved. A very small game might have about 40 to 50 people. A very big game, like Assassin's Creed, for example, you're talking about up to 400 people. And now it seems like we can make games that are even bigger than that. It's uncommon in the video game industry, but it can happen. For a big studio like Ubisoft, yeah, 400 people, that's not unheard of.
Why is Ubisoft such a successful company?
Why is Ubisoft successful? I think that a big part of that is the culture of people in Montreal and generally in Canada. It's a very open culture here. People like to talk, they like to be involved. The decisions for the games aren't made with just one or two people. If you have 100 people working on a game, these 100 people get to have their input. And when you make a game that's going to be successful with 5 million people, you have to make sure that everybody on your team said something, that was interesting to them that got put in the game. If I make a game just for myself, maybe 100,000 people in the world are gonna like it. But if I make a game that you like, that I like, that they like, then we make sure that lots of people, enjoy it. And Ubisoft is all about that. There's nobody in an office somewhere except for the president. Everybody else is all over the floor, big open lofts. It's a culture thing, right? Everybody is sharing ideas. And personally, I think that's why we're successful.
Who decides which games are made and why?
Who decides what games are made? That's a very complicated process. Basically, we have the marketing department that'll tell us what's interesting these days. They'll say, what are people into? What kind of subjects are good? Then we have the direction of the studio that'll tell us where they want to be. So they might say, you know what, this year we want to be competitive against that kind of game. So to use an example, they could say, we want to make a World of Warcraft type of game. So they would come up to us and they would say, okay, so who's got an idea, who can make something along those lines? And then we try a couple things, and then that's how they decide what gets made. As for who makes the games, it depends on the specific skills of people, right? You get people that are proficient in the kind of game that you're trying to create. So if it's a shooter game, well, we go ask people that make shooter games. It's pretty obvious, but it has many layers of people that have to sign off and say yes before somebody like me gets to do something.
Why do you think teens like video games so much?
Why do teens like video games? I think that the video games are being made by people that are not very far in generation anymore. When people were making movies, there was a big gap in the age difference between people that were making the movie and people that were watching the movie necessarily. So nowadays, it's more relevant. Like where the subject is more interesting, the trends, even what the characters wear, their haircut, it's more current. It's more interesting. And I think that we managed to make games now that are very entertaining for a wide range of people. It's not just for, there's a time when they say it's for boys only, or, they'd say, well, only, a certain type of people are going to like games. It's not true anymore because we're able to recreate all facets of life. If you like snowboarding, you like golfing, you like racing cars, you think the army is cool, you want to go in space, we can all do that. And it's things that people can't necessarily do on their own. Even travel. Not everybody gets to travel to interesting countries, go underwater, go see the ocean, but we can do that in games. So basically, since we can sell just about any fantasy that people have, I think that teens have a lot of those fantasies, they have a lot of ideas, they want to travel, they want to see things, and we can do that, So I think that it's just a question that now we have a wide range of games that appeal to everybody. And teens, certainly it's one of our biggest audience. So we're definitely catering directly to them, trying to give, teens exactly what they're looking for. And it's been pretty successful, I think.
What is your favorite part of your job?
The favorite part of my job is that it's always changing. I don't sit at my computer all day. It's definitely a big part of what I do, but because every time I make a new game, it's a new subject matter, it's always different. I never do the same thing. And the people are always changing. I'm always working with new people, so I make lots of friends. And it's fun. It's really cool. It's not the same 9-to-5 routine every day.
Like, what? Like, there's a lot of video games in the world, and why can Xbox 360, Spencer saw, why cannot be for PS3 and like that?
Okay, so why are games on specific consoles sometimes? Yeah. A lot of that is based on marketing and where you want to be. So Microsoft might come to us and say, look, we're looking for a game just for the Xbox. Are you guys willing to do that? So we'll say, okay, but if we do an Xbox only game, then that means that we sell less of them because we don't have the PlayStation. And then usually what Microsoft will say is, okay, well, we're going to pay for some of the publicity. We'll make sure that you sell a lot of that Xbox game. And basically it evens out that way. Sometimes it can also be because a developer just doesn't have experience working on a specific console. If you have 20 guys that are used to only working on Xbox, it's not worth it for them to try to make a PlayStation game. So, you know, it depends. You pick a company like Ubisoft. Most of the time, generally, we try to release on as many consoles as possible because we're trying to just offer the game, you know, everywhere.
How do you become a video game tester?
Being a tester is quite straightforward. I know for Ubisoft, you have to be 18 years old and you have to apply. You have to like video games a lot and you have to be able to play video games all day. It sounds like a lot of fun, but if you really think about it, you have to be willing to, you know, drive the same car into the same wall for 6 hours until you find the one little hole somewhere that doesn't work right. So the testers have a really hard job. It takes people that are very, very dedicated, but you just have to, you know, you apply. If you have the right motivation, the right skill set, you can definitely do it. It's a good way to start in the industry too.
How did you guys make those shooting games there, like all of the action games and stuff?
To make an action game, you really have to understand what people are looking for, right? There's a big difference between what people think is real and what reality is. Since we were making a military shooter, if we made a real game, it would be very boring because most of the weapons would behave the same way. There wouldn't be that much action. You know, soldiers dig holes and they build, you know, sandbags, stuff like that. That's not interesting. So then we look at movies. We go, you know, what do people think war should be like? It's tons of actions, tons of explosions, helicopters flying everywhere. So we inspire ourselves from that, but at the same time, we try to respect the material so that everybody that has been in a conflict or has been to war, has parents that have been to war, won't be offended. So we're trying to be respectful, but at the same time give something to people that is going to be very exciting. And when you try to do that kind of action, it's relatively simple. We just come up with ideas in our mind of something that looks really cool, and then that's our plan, right? If it's a picture, it could be a picture, it could be a drawing, and then somebody's going to make the sound for it, somebody's going to make the level, somebody's going to make all the mechanics, and then we put all that together and we create these sequences that we call, you know, these action shots that are really, really cool. And that's about it, really. It's not too complicated for action games.
And how do you guys make the animations of the characters?
That's very simple. We take actors, we bring them to the motion capture studio, we put all sorts of sensors on them, and then we have them run around and do all sorts of moves. Like we'll go to the studio, we'll say, okay, now pretend like you're shooting your gun. Now pretend like you've just been shot and you're falling down, or pretend like you're jumping on top of a car. You know, so these guys are just in a gym with a bunch of like sandbags and punching bags and a bunch of toys. You know, like Nerf guns and swords, like we use all the time.
What's the most baddest game like you ever made?
The worst game? Well, that's easy. I worked on a game called Rainbow Six Lockdown, which ended up being not very successful. You have to learn how to make bad games to make good ones, because you have to be able to deal with, you know, people saying that your work is horrible, which is not easy. It's very, very hard. But it wasn't a very good game. It wasn't very good because we tried to do all sorts of things different all at once. You know, we didn't try to do one thing different. We changed everything. You know, I don't know if you guys ever watched The Simpsons, but at some point Homer tries to design a car and like everything is new and it looks horrible. Well, that's what we did, you know. And at first it sounds cool and it sounds exciting, but in the end when people look at it, they go, I don't get what you guys are trying to do. You know, like you could have a really good idea, but if you have a hamster in space shooting bubbles while he's eating carrots and somehow that makes magic, nobody gets it. You know, it might be cool in your head, but nobody gets it. So that was our problem. That's why that game was difficult. But you gotta make bad ones to make good ones.
Okay.
Yeah. When I worked on Naruto, it was an already established product, right? There was comic books, there was the series on TV that was really, really popular. So for us, it was really difficult because we had to make sure that when somebody watches the cartoon, they have to live what the characters have been living, but it can't just be the same thing, otherwise there's no secret. You know, it's like if you make a game about the Titanic, then if everybody knows the ship sinks at the end, then it's not a very fun game, right? So Naruto, he does certain things, like he has a little girl he's interested in, stuff like that. We had to make sure that it was the same thing, but with differences. So it was interesting. That's why it was so cool to be able to travel to Japan and, you know, talk to people and actually watch the cartoons in Japan with Japanese audiences to see how they reacted to certain things. And I found, you know, things that I wasn't familiar with, such as to them, toilet humor was excessively funny, and to us, it's not so current anymore. But if Naruto eats a little bit too quick and ends up in the bathroom, that was a very big moment, very big laughter, and I realized, okay, this is something that we need to be doing.
What was the hardest video game you ever created?
The most difficult game I ever worked on was called The Matrix Online. It was a game based off of the Matrix movies. It was difficult because the guys that created The Matrix, the Wachowski brothers, they had a very specific view of how things should be. And for me, it's very restrictive what I could, take liberties with. So having to deal with somebody that has such a clear view of what the product should be in their head, it's very difficult because then I have to listen to them speak and try to extract things from what they're saying that I can take liberties with. It's difficult. It's very, very hard. It was harder than working on a game like Naruto with all this stuff that was already, already produced. That was harder, definitely.
The game that had like a bit of bad graphics that Ubisoft made.
So if I get the essence of your question, you're wondering why sometimes the graphics can be horrible in a game and why sometimes they're very nice and why sometimes it's uneven, right? Well, there's many reasons. The Xbox or the PlayStation is a computer, right? And a computer has memory. It has only so much stuff that it can show at one time. So we make decisions about what's going to be shown, and sometimes the graphics take a backseat to something else. Like physics, for example. Physics means anything that flies in the world, that bounces on walls, that costs some of that computer power that's in the console. So we might say we want a lot of that, so we're going to have less of those special effects, less of the graphics. And even to a point where about 5-6 years ago, some of the games we made, it wasn't that important to have good graphics because the game was about something else. Now it's more even. We're trying to keep things, more pleasant to the eye. But it didn't, it wasn't that way all the time.
You make any type of video game?
Absolutely, anything. I am absolutely willing to do racing games, Barbie's Magical Horse Adventure, to puzzle games, to adventure games, medieval games. Ultimately, when you make games, you're just trying to, create a dream and a fantasy. So that's what's fun. Creating is fun. I just don't do one type of game, and that's my only interest. So yeah, absolutely any type of game. It's all fun to me. It's all, games.
I hope you like the movie.
And keep playing those video games!